Morning.
Malcolm debated at the Oxford Union in England.
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
Malcolm was always involved somewhere in the struggle. And I remember in January of 1965.
Oh, welcome to the Gilchrist experience. That's Malcolm in January 1965. Now, he died February 21st, 1965. Now, you see at the end of his life, he was saying, I don't care what color you are. I'll work with you as long as you're willing to take on the evil that exists in the world. You know, Malcolm had turned around from calling all white people devils to a month before he passed, saying, I'll work with everybody. So as a dedication to Black History Month, there should be Black History Month every month in the year. I mean, we as a people have been lied to and taught all these different things about ourselves that we weren't capable to think for ourselves, that we need to be directed and supervised by a superior being as if they were from out of space and we were, you know, just to whatever they decided that we were. Come to find out that we're the rulers of the planet, that we're the spiritual people, that we're the God-sent individuals, that Jesus Christ was an Ethiopian Jew, a black Ethiopian Jew.
Israelite.
All right, all these lies, you know, we all come out of the Tarzan era. How Tarzan dominated the jungle with no clothes on and pale. How can you be in a jungle with no scratches on yourself and no suntan?
Well, when you're filming in Jersey, you can do that.
You know, I mean, and you take and you look at the result of all this, and how we manage to be elders, and you look at what's happening to our kids. We've got a black president, and we've got our kids showing their drawers and following wannabe gangsters, killing each other. What is the state of Black America in doing the 4th day of Black History Month?
The critical thing, and this certainly is part of our African heritage celebration, the education of our children, for the most part, is in the hands of people who don't look like us.
That's right.
Whether you're talking about Bedford-Stuyvesant or you're talking about San Francisco, and sometimes even in some parts of Ghana and the Caribbean, the education of our children is in the hands of people who don't look like us. And that has some consequences a lot of adults don't realize, and certainly the children don't realize. Because the conversation that we as adults have, many of our children don't understand our references, because in their schools with teachers who don't look like us, they have no idea what's going on. And that is a critical thing. That's one of the things I'd like to suggest this coming month, that we be alert to who is in charge of the education of our children. That is a critical point that I think not enough parents think about or talk about.
Well, who most influenced you? I mean, Malcolm was my biggest influence between Malcolm and Martin. Martin was Jesus for me. I mean, you know, I was such I gave up on being nice after that. I mean, how could they take him out? You know, and we're all raised in the church somehow. You know, somehow we always go back to that original thing. And knowing that you're a spiritual person, you learn something about other people when they're not like that. And we've seemed to be turned completely around. We cater to the devil within ourselves when the spiritual part is our nature.
Well, you know, the spiritual part, you got to remember that the movement came through the church years ago.
Right.
And the church was the only institution that black people had.
Right.
It was the only institution they had that they could really utilize where the white man wasn't going to get you for going to church. Because they were under the notion that Christianity would keep you docile and complacent. So the clergy, the black preachers were very adept and astute with regard to how they preached, what they preached, and when they preached it. So it was through the church that the movement came. Martin made it a moral issue.
Right.
Not so much a legal issue as a moral issue, causing other spiritual people to step forward. Not attorneys, but spiritual leaders, rabbis and priests and such. And so the focus of, when you say spiritual, our people have moved away from their spiritual roots and have moved into the crap of American society.
Become like other people, which is what some people wanted us to be like other people.
There is no spirit in America. They talk about the Pilgrims and all that stuff, but those people were not the idealistic Christians. You know, they were murderers, they were butchers. So black people have gotten into America and thinking that they've arrived, and you know, NYU was touting a year ago a theme in the post-racial era. Now, for NYU to be touting that is ridiculous, but they were touting it. And for young black students to even think they live in a post-racial era, they're not even dealing with reality.
But that's the lie that the children and adults have believed that we're in a post-racial era.
You tell the lie long enough and they'll believe it. So, but what I'm getting to is that we as a people, we need to get back to our spiritual roots. Because trying to deal, as we've been dealing for years, with the insanity of this culture, the insanity of this nation, it will drive you to drink, it'll drive you crazy, it'll push you over the edge. And
plan genocide.
If you don't have some spiritual depth in you, it'll sweep you away. So the church needs to understand that it needs to move back into its original position of involvement. Churches and pastors and such, they've been too complacent, too quiet. They want to be a part of society as opposed to guiding society.
What about the fact that
you can't be a part of society? You need to be leading society because society is sick.
What about the fact that in most churches they teach doctrines, but they don't teach to be Christ-like, the basic principles of Christ?
Well, that's what Christianity is. It's living it.
But there's a big difference between Christians and being Christ-like in a lot of churches.
Right. Well, that's a matter of teaching it. And then you got to look at seminary, where the preachers have gone to study, and what is the focus of the particular seminary, because various seminaries deliver a different theology. The theology...
Isn't the basic premise of Christianity to be humble?
Well, that's an attribute. It should be an attribute, but that's not a main focus of seminarians. There are seminary here, Union Theological, and New York Theological. You know, they're very much about the communities, urban. He's got it all. You know, The urban ministries, you know, you can't teach. There was an ideology that they had in the 60s, the 4 spiritual laws, you know, and they would use these little color wheels, and white was for purity, and black was for sin, and red was for the blood of Jesus, and I forgot whatever it else was. And we challenged these evangelists who showed up in New York talking this color wheel. I said, listen, if you read your Bible, the Bible says, though your sin be as scarlet, black is not sin. The color relative to sin is scarlet. That's red. All right? But you're putting it down as black. All right? Part of that Eurocentric negativism that's thrown at black people. So even in that, see, because if you don't understand racism, if you can't see it for what it is and it's in your face, you'll continually be confused. You know, so we made them do away with that nonsense. You know, you can't come into Brooklyn, into Harlem, into Queens talking about white is pure and black is sin. You know, you can't do that.
But you know, Clemson, you and I were at a debate last Sunday between Professor Jeffries and the other fellow's name, who was representing Marcus Garvey.
He does a radio program, Bashir.
Bashir, right, right, Bashir. Well, they were showing the contrast of Marcus Garvey, who came here in 1916, promoting Pan-Africanism. All right, now, I have a clip here where it shows that Marcus Garvey was married and left Jamaica, 29 years old, because he was on the lam. Because this organization was running in Jamaica, the donors had put him on the spot because he was taking the donations and spending it on his own expenses. So he had to leave town. And he left his wife and the organization, hopped on a boat and came to America, which very few people know about Marcus Garvey.
Of course, it's not something that makes the headlines.
Of course,
the Back to Africa call is what's significant. And though he, like all of us, ultimately may have flaws in our character, one of the things that we're challenged to do is, do we then teach our children to copy someone's flaws or to copy what is the best of their character? And the Back to Africa movement that certainly Marcus Garvey was part of, that is just one facet of the education of our children that was significant for generations after him. Because a whole lot of folks in New York in the 50s and 60s were just learning when they heard somebody say, "Well, black is beautiful, what does that mean?" And then someone suggested to them, that was said 40 years ago. The good things that he did that should have been taught to our children, in many cases, is still not being taught. And getting back to the point about celebrating African Heritage this month, we have to make sure that our children know what the good things were that Garvey did. We have to make sure our children know, you know, that Ossie and Ruby weren't just entertainers. We have to make sure that our children understand that Adam Powell was a significant point that lifted up people and united people of Harlem. Now, other folks are going to dig into the dirt and make headlines and gossip and stuff about them. But what we owe to our children is to be able to cite to our children some of their forebears who have done some wonderful things. And this is part of when we started with speaking before about the Diallo Foundation and some of the things that Amadou Diallo and his family were involved in long before that tragic day when the cop pulled the trigger. This is part of what our children need to know about. We have to make sure they understand, and it's not just ancient past. You know, whether you're talking about John Matusi Branch of the African Poetry Theater in Queens, you're talking about Thea Bowman, people who certainly within my lifetime have influenced me and helped me to understand the importance of our history. This becomes critical. Now, this is one of the things that we have to be aware of, is that our children have been aspiring to be just like the white folks. And through the 70s and 80s, this is some of what the media and Hollywood, and sad to say, some of us have been saying, you have to be just like Mr. O'Connor down the block. You should be just like Mr. Shaughnessy. Some of us have been saying that to our children. You have to be just like white folks. And aspiring to be like white folks is some of what has destroyed our recognition of our culture. we have to move away from that. That our children have to understand they need to be more, like John Grant.
But see, that's the misnomer right there. I mean, just because you speak properly and you do things right and you study hard, that doesn't have to be white. I can't. I mean,
No, it's
that's
not.
right. Yeah, it's not being white. It's
is
being
true.
smart.
Most of our children don't make that distinction.
But see now, today, if you're black, you got to be stupid to be black. You got to, you cuss your mother out, and that's being black. You got to be a gangster. You got to be look nasty at everybody, ready to jump at any. I'm worrying about how we treat each other. It's disgusting the way we treat each other.
Well, we
And
don't.
I bring up Marcus Garvey because of the rip that we were talking about at the argument, and how
Marcus Garvey
all right,
and
now I
Booker
bring up
T.
Marcus
Washington.
Garvey because I went and researched what
Wasn't Marcus
Professor
Garvey? It wasn't Booker T. It was W.
W. Du Bois.
W. Du Bois.
But let me say, Black history.
What did you get out of that debate?
What I got out of it was that both Booker T, Marcus Garvey, and Du Bois really were committed to the liberation of African people.
Good.
And you see that all over today. I mean, first, let me just say, in terms of African history, there is but one history. World history is an African story.
Amen. Amen.
It is the story of African people who are the first born, created, or brought into being, the first human beings. And they were on the planet millions of years. They migrated to Europe. All human knowledge came through our ancestors.
The white
Europeans,
anthropologists won't concede that.
well,
You're speaking the truth, but there's liars out there.
no,
who
that's
deny it.
scientific,
Truth will always
that's
lie.
anthropological.
If you study hard, you're being white.
And that's the
know what I
truth of history, and it's documented. I mean,
It's
if
not
you
being taught to
do
our
if you do the DNA, if you look at the genome project that was done at Yale University, and by the way, that genome project at Yale University, which was headed up by Dr. K.K. Kidd, and it was 16 geneticists from around the planet, and they took DNA samples from all people on the planet. Groups. Irish, Germans, Jews,
It all
everybody.
traces back to Africa.
And what they determined was that what they proved was that all people on the planet have 6 DNA series. And let me say, the higher the DNA series, the greater the potential for genius and creativity. For an example, the orangutan has 3 DNA series. He's a pretty smart, fella. But he's not as smart as the gorilla, who has 4 DNA series. Gorillas sit down and watch television, and he can convince you that he's really watching it. He'll change the channel. But he is not as smart as the chimpanzee, who has 5 DNA series. Chimpanzee, you can teach him to recognize up to 200 words that you and I speak. And after that comes the European. Our white people, I'm talking about Asians, talking about everybody except black folk, they have 6 DNA series. And look at the difference between the chimpanzee with 5 and Europeans and the other races with 6. Look at what they can do compared to what the chimpanzee can do. Then comes the African. The African has 9 DNA series.
9?
9, 3 graders, and you should hear Professor Oibo lay that out.
Gabriel
of science.
Oyibo.
Gabriel Oyibo.
Everybody should read his work.
And so when you look at us? Who are we? When you begin to understand our history and how it has been distorted, and how all human knowledge comes into the world, whether it's science, whether it's religion, whether it's mathematics, whether it's geology, I don't care what it is. The spoken language itself, all comes through African people. And in fact, it was all here before Europeans came out of the caves of Europe. And Europeans themselves are they come out of black folks. You know, Africans who went into Europe during the last warming ice age and had to adjust to the environment, and, you know, according to the works of people like Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, and this is all scientific. I mean, you know, they had to lose the pigment, their hair had to change for survival, and they survived in the ice. So you know, I'm not necessarily trying to play Europeans down, because I think it was incredible that they managed to survive in the ice as much as 3 miles thick, but they survived, which gives you an understanding that nature itself, who we all are, aspects of nature. I mean, there is but one energy.
They had to be cannibals to survive.
That too, and so. But when you begin to look at the sweep,
Is that what you do when you become cannibalistic? You lose your spirituality.
well, your environment shapes you. So if you're in an environment,
you're a product of your environment,
that in order to survive, you take on that environment. You become that environment.
Right.
It's scarce. I mean, you know, if like Dr. Jeffers always said, if a rabbit happened to come by your cave and you run out and catch him, you ain't gonna run down to the next cave and holler, "Hey, y'all, we just got a rabbit up here. Let's have a rabbit party. Y'all come on and share." No, if you see the people down at the next cave coming up to your cave because you got a rabbit, everybody get their club and y'all go to war. And so, because your environment is shaping your culture, because you may not see another rabbit for the whole darn year. You may not have anything to eat. It's scarce. So you take on that environment. It's
So that's
environment
hostility.
Only the strong survive.
Now you just explain what happens in Harlem when they bring a crack epidemic, when we're fighting and surviving ourselves.
Well, that's that's not,
but
it's not
the same element.
Crack was a scientific experiment.
Planned genocide.
That
but
was a
see
development.
how we came out of it.
That was developed. That wasn't natural. And this is another thing we need to understand, the way some of these Eurocentric minded people think. Thinking themselves to be superior, you can treat other people less than. So, you develop a drug.
Especially if you can control it.
Well, this is how you control, because you know you can't control them unless you do something devious. So you develop this thing called crack, which is a synthetic drug, number one. Molecularly, it's analogous to melanin. So when it's ingested by the body assumes it's melanin and fuses with this chemical substance. You've heard people say, "I took one hit of it and I was gone. You know, I was hooked instantaneously." You don't ever hear about white people getting hooked on crack.
Oh yeah.
From the first hit.
Yes, you do.
No.
Yes, you do.
Let me finish.
Yes, you do.
Dr. Patricia Newton, foremost authority on genetics and DNA.
You ever smoke crack?
I don't smoke cigarettes. There's no need for me to smoke. I'm not that stupid. Now, the chemical was developed for black people, which is why it is a more serious crime to possess it, because they create it, they put it out there, then they put you away for 20 years for having one portion, as opposed to a white guy that has a quarter of a pound of cocaine, and he's getting out on probation because it's powder cocaine. The more melanated you are, the stronger your addiction to this substance. It is the study, ergo the study of genetics. All right? This genome project, they're not looking for rapists and murderers. They have broken down the human genome into every race and every subgroup in the world. And if they need to eradicate a particular group of people, they could eradicate every Haitian on the planet and not affect any other African people.
That's true.
All right?
Yes.
So when they developed this crack cocaine, Just as the Germans developed methadone during the Second World War and were experimenting on the Jews, this is what these people were doing with black people with crack cocaine.
Well, that's the 1980s when the Republicans, when Reaganomics, voodoo economics, Bush called it, the first Bush.
It was Bush. Bush was involved in the crack epidemic along with Bill Clinton.
CIA.
And they brought the cocaine in from with the Sandinistas and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And we're making up the cocaine, the crack, and dispersing it across the country.
And that brought the greed, and as an end result, we have our youth of today.
What are we doing about it?
Okay.
Teaching them their history.
Who's
That's
doing
what
the
we're trying.
teaching? This is where we come in.
I think it has
and
to
this
come
program
from
becomes
us.
critical.
It has to
Teaching
come
starts
from
at
the
home.
elders.
Teaching starts. My mother, my father died, I was what? 4. Before I went to school, I knew how to read and write my name, not print it, write it in script before I went to kindergarten. Education starts in the home. And our people need to get this in their heads.
But
it's not the teacher's job to teach your child. It is your job. You brought the child here, that is your responsibility. As a parent, you have been entrusted with another human being, and you don't entrust that child to other people outside of your first teaching and garnering that child and giving them the basics.
But see, you have to understand, during our day, we were blessed to be exposed to that sort of love energy. You talk about people that were the parents of the crack babies. We're talking about people that got hung up into crack. Most black society got hung up into drinking and coke. And then later on in the 80s, when the Republicans came in, crack. And only way you could make money was to hustle your own people, to kill your own. And we survived and came out of the cave.
We survived heroin.
Well, heroin was even.
Heroin was, everybody was
But
nodding out
crack
in
was
the
the
60s.
worst thing that black society has ever seen.
Yeah, but the fact
Ever
Do
is,
we
seen.
have the strength cumulatively to overcome what those chemicals have done to our youth? And that's a critical question, because the love of our children is a critical part of what
The
moves us
parents
forward.
that came out of the crack era were raising their kids. They weren't teaching them how to read at 4.
Can we do it
No,
now?
you know,
Most of them were single-parent homes where they were just, surviving off welfare or whatever, and turning tricks or whatever they were doing during the 80s.
bloody
The
brutal
80s
past.
was genocide.
I think we play our people short.
Right.
When Africans came out of slavery, the Emancipation Process, and by the way, Africans made the difference between liberation and enslavement, because the great battles that were fought before Africans were involved in the war, it was, it was balanced. But when Africans were able to get into the Civil War, there were very few battles that were lost by the North.
Right.
I'm just going to cut to the chase. Africans captured Richmond, Virginia, which was the headquarters
of the Confederacy.
of the Confederacy. Robert E.
Right,
Lee. It was
right.
the 4th, the 27th. I mean, the 5th. I mean, these were all black divisions that led the charge at Newmarket Heights, that opened the road at tremendous losses. In fact, our children should really know how that battle was fought, because you had a fortified ring around Richmond, which had to be broken, and it was black troops who had to go up the hill across 4 Mile Creek and climb that embankment, and they had to do it. They had to move up there so fast that they could not stop to load the rifle. So
reload.
Grant had told them to take they couldn't stop.
Bayonets and just keep-
Yeah, they had to go up there and ban that. So they had to go through a sheet of just lead. So much lead was put down on these brothers that there was a cloud around them. So they had, on the top of that hill, they had Napoleon cannons that shoot accurate up to 2 miles, and they were only a mile away. when they crossed 4 Mile Creek. So they had to go across 4 Mile Creek, which those cannons were trained on 4 Mile Creek, because they had to cross it. Then they had to go up this hill, which was another almost half mile. Up on the top of that, you had all the Confederate soldiers. You had rifle pits all around, and you had all kinds of traps and debris in front of them. These brothers, about 5,000 of them, volunteered to go up that hill, and the Confederates was hollering, "Come on, niggas, come on!" And they were just mowing them down. You 400 or 500, they said, for 100 yards, you couldn't make a step without stepping on a body. I mean, they spread their blood, but they came through that. They came through that lead to ban that and to take that hill and open the way. And then later on, another black regiment captured Richmond, Virginia. I'm just pointing this out because nobody has given more to build America than black people. Not only did they give of their blood and their sweat and their labor to work, millions of us, sun up to sundown, without a payday, never being paid, bodies all over the place, to build the wealth of not only America, but of Europe, but our intellectual mind. There's not hardly one invention in this country that black people have not done or had or participated in. There's nobody who has given. This is our country. There's not an inch of land that is not soaked with our blood in this country. Still being, our story is the greatest story in America.
Taught?
But
never told.
Then you
But
check,
if we
you
were
check
to,
all this,
look,
and today you go to Chicago and we're killing each other like crazy.
that is because we don't have our mind. We're out of our mind. We don't know who we are. We don't know the history that we've given everything to humanity, to the world, to make. We're civilization. We've civilized the planet.
And why are we killing each other the way we're killing
We're
each
killing each other because we don't know it. We don't know who
How
we
many
are.
black men do you know you can trust?
How many black men? I can trust a lot of
whole
black
lot.
men. I know a lot of black men I can trust.
And
A lot. I trust you. I trust Graham.
here,
I trust.
We have learned through the years, because we're not strangers to each other. We've learned through the years that this is a gathering of intelligent, dedicated black men. That's one thing. And now, a whole lot of brothers may never have sat down with people like that.
Why
and
don't we
it's
have
our
a black
challenge to bring that
corporation?
forward.
You got plenty of black corporations. The thing is this: it's not as negative as it is, not as negative as it could be.
Why aren't
And
we all supporting President Obama?
It's not about President Obama.
It's about a
President
black man
Obama is not the
achieving-
black race. He is not Africa.
We're talking about what he's
not
achieved.
He's not the totality of African Americans. It's bigger than Barack Obama. All right?
But
I
I
think our
think we
commitment has to be
should.
to our
I
children.
think we should
Your
see
children, my
Barack
children,
Obama
everybody's
as
children.
a product of our movement because
Amen.
he is. He
Right.
is a product.
That's right.
And I don't know what all Barack Obama has to go through. I mean, you know, when you are
can
the
see
head,
it.
when you are the head of the American corporation, you're not the head of it. You work for
Right.
those, you know,
Sure, he's got a job.
and
He's got a job to do. That's all.
So
It's a job.
I don't know all that President Barack Obama is involved with.
But
and
he's
being-
treated the way he's treated because he's a black man.
all right.
Well, that's
okay.
a different-
But we have
agree
to
with that.
prepare our children to look beyond that.
Say, what I'm saying, he's being treated the way he's being treated because he's black.
Right.
Yes,
Didn't
that's
your
true.
mother tell you?
No doubt,
Didn't
right?
your mother tell you don't do what they do because you can't do what they do?
That's right. You have to be
Not
better
that you
than
can't
them.
perform,
And
but
he's the best
you can't
president
do
I've
the
seen up there in
skullduggery.
my lifetime.
You can't do the skullduggery that they
I mean,
do.
he's fair.
When you step out, you have to step out correct.
He's got the
and that's how he has
patience to
stepped out.
deal with these
Because
crackers.
there's nothing that they can say
are
about him,
just as-
about his wife,
you know.
that is derogatory. The man has passed the litmus test.
Right.
And that's what bothers them.
But
they got nothing
we as
that
old
they
men
can bring up.
recognize that. The average 10, 12-year-old
That's my
doesn't
problem.
understand
That's my problem.
how Obama got to where he is and the skills that he has. Our challenge is to address those 10, 12-year-olds so that they can have some understanding of who they are and what they can achieve, because the major media is trying to tell them they're nobody and they're nothing, trying to water down their heritage. We have to address these younger brothers and sisters and let them know that they are on a road that has been forged by some wonderful men and women, and we have our obligation to them is to lift them up so they can accomplish more than we did. They can accomplish more than President Obama did. But we're the ones charged with that. When we hand
But
out
do
children
they care
to
anything
people who
about
don't
it?
look like us.
Friday night, I'm going to be in Teaneck, New Jersey at a school. Lamont Thomas is the principal. It's a middle school. And I was with the boys there last year. And they spend the Friday night and the Saturday at the school. It's all boys. And what Lamont has done, great thinker, he's brought in black men from Teaneck, New Jersey. And they asked me to come as the guest speaker last year. And I was taken by, it was about 85 young boys, teenage boys, 13, 14, 15 years old. And there were about 65 black men there. The police chief was there, sergeants, detectives, plumbers, bakers, chefs, hardware store owners, barbers, a plethora of black men, business owners, workers, to talk with the boys, right? And we, all these kids, they want to be a ball player. Scrap that. And I told them, you need to work your way around this room and talk to every black man you see here. Because these are not the men that are running in and out of the bar. They're not running around with loose women. They're not in and out of jail. They're not using drugs. These are men that get up every day and perform a task for their family and for your community. Because you're only going to be 13 or 14 for a little bit of time. And you've got to look forward. It's not about today. Nothing is about today. Everything is about tomorrow. And if you're not preparing yourself now, your tomorrows will be sad. And I'll be back over with them Friday night to spend the night. And I had to challenge them to lay out their plan for the next 5 years.
That's wonderful.
You know,
You see, because-
I'm just so happy that I came up to the world that I was born in, because I don't know where I'd be if I were here today.
It's rougher for our children than it was for us.
It's tough to be a young person
It
today.
is rough.
Because you got so much crap out here. It's amazing how they get through it. I'm part of the Boys and Girls Club and of Harlem. We're building a building up on 145th Street. And I'm exposed to Manhattanville, the projects, and Douglas Academy on 146th Street in Lenox. And we have another thing up at 153. And just to think of how I get fearful about talking to these kids, because I don't like half of them, because of the pants and just the attitude and the arrogance of most of them. And they don't appreciate the struggle that we went through to get
Many of them
here.
don't
They
know a
don't
man
know.
like you.
They don't know.
They don't know a man like you. They don't
anything
know
about
men
it.
like this.
Yeah.
I was watching, the boys were watching a video of James Brown. They didn't even know who James Brown was.
That's,
So
That's like
they
a
don't
fictional
know.
story if they watch
They
it.
have
but it's
no
all
point
about
of reference.
hip-hop and gangsterism.
We
That-
have to move
that-
past
We,
that.
it's not about learning to read or write. It's learning how to rap and be hip. And the guys go to parties and don't even dance with the girls.
The challenge is
It's
on
not cool
us.
to dance. I mean,
Yes,
what,
you're
what kind
correct,
of
Owen.
socialization
old
is
The
that?
challenge
And
is on us.
I have to concede, we old men have a job to do. And what Brother Witherspoon has mentioned that he's doing in Jersey, certainly what Brother Brown has done with his incredible library of videos, because there's stuff there that there are lessons that need to be taught, and people need to understand what his video library is, his archives. That kind of thing, we have to pass that on. Now, there are a couple of us who are working together. This is where I'm going to do a shameless plug. On February 21st, there are a group of men within the National Action Network that are doing a program for teenage boys. This is exactly what we're talking about. Getting together so that some of the old men can do what's necessary, so some of the young men
we
will
need
come
to
up
do- we need
and
to talk
move up and
seriously
be able
about
to,
that. All right.
to be able to accomplish themselves. So that's 12 o'clock on February 21st, 145th Street, Malcolm X Boulevard. We're going to have older men who've
Okay.
been through the experience of marriage and fatherhood and some of the old folks who've made it will be talking to some of the young brothers, and we need to have some teenagers there. We need to have some of the young bloods there so that they understand the guy in the street corner is not the only exemplar of what you can copy. They need to understand that some idiot that they would see being clowned on TV is not the example they need to follow. They need to, this is part of what we're talking about, what was done for us, because there's some significant black men who've influenced our lives. What was done for us, it's our turn to do that for some of the young bloods so that they will understand how they can grow into manhood in a safe, sane way, because the media is not giving that to them.
All right, let's go over, let's
want
review a couple of our history. Run that other roll in. This is what Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois for Black History Month. Here's how, and Booker T. Washington was a slave. All right?
Came through the underground.
One of the first moments where Du Bois comes onto the national stage is the brewing controversy between his ideas about racial progress and how to move the race forward, and the leading African-American figure of that time period, the late 19th and early 20th century, Booker T. Washington. In the beginning, they agreed on many points about the importance of education and moving the race forward. It turns out, though, that because Du Bois was northern-born and had access to some of the best schools in New England and really was encouraged to think broadly, spent part of his elite graduate education being trained in Berlin, working with Max Weber. By contrast to Booker T. Washington, who was self-educated, a very gifted and talented man, but he was born as a slave. That fundamental difference certainly shaped their sense of change over time. The life that Booker T. Washington eventually led as the leading, most recognized figure of African American society meant that his expectations for what the white race was willing to do on behalf of black people were very different than of Du Bois. You could say Du Bois was a utopian idealist in some respects, and Booker T. Washington was a pragmatist, better known as an accommodationist. And so it set up an ongoing debate. Eventually, Booker T. Washington's program sustained the ethos of Jim Crow America because it was about black people working, but on white people's terms. It was about a lack of political enfranchisement because black people were subject to poll taxes and literacy tests and the inability to vote. And it was ultimately about a form of second-class citizenship that was segregated America. In this regard, Du Bois did see that real change, fundamental change, living up to the real promises of racial democracy in America, depended upon agitation, depended upon a grasp for power.
Interesting. Now, we're talking about Booker T. and W.E. Du Bois. Booker T. being a Southerner, Du Bois being exposed to high yellow advantages of the North. You know, and but then we throw in Marcus Garvey. Again, we're talking about these debates at Clark House, which we might announce next week. We're going to do Martin and Malcolm, and next week we'll cover Martin and Malcolm, which we cover all the time. But I want to throw in Marcus Garvey to give you a little flavor of what the debate was about, and we discussed. We got another 15 minutes. So can you run any, you have any of those?
Automobile sitting back.
At the age of 34, Garvey claimed millions of followers worldwide. His controversial goal, to create an independent black nation, made him one of the most powerful people in America and one of the most hated. The federal government targeted him as a threat to national security. Rival black leaders denounced him as a lunatic and a traitor to the race. But Garvey may have been his own worst enemy.
He wasn't one to take advice from others kindly. He made his own decisions, and he would rise or fall by the decisions that he made, because he was a supreme egotist.
Volatile and secretive, yet charismatic and visionary, Marcus Garvey changed forever the way black Americans looked at themselves and the world.
He started something that became bigger than Garvey himself. He, more than any other figure in the 20th century, symbolizes the turning of the perception of black people into something positive. Garvey's father was a mason, a professional mason. And among the things that he did was to create tombs for people in the St. Anne's Bay graveyard. He took Garvey with him to the graveyard one day, and they were digging this grave, and his father had Garvey go down inside the grave, but then he pulled the ladder up and left the child in the bottom of the grave. Garvey said that he cried out and his father wouldn't let him get back up out of the grave. He wanted to teach him a lesson.
Alone in the grave, young Marcus Garvey learned that he could rely on no one but himself. It was a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Gentlemen?
Can I say this? First of all, I want to thank and commend both of you brothers on what you are doing in terms of teaching the generation that comes after us. And this is something, we have so many models. Our history is replete with models of commitment, dedication, love, and what to do. Now, there's a brother in Utah, Alabama, named Bishop Luke Edwards, who presents a model. This is a brother who had a church, about 40 parishioners, all of them on welfare, and he took that group by collectively using their welfare money, the checks that they had, because individually they couldn't even buy enough food to eat for a month. But collectively, they had a lot of money. And they managed to accumulate over 5,000 acres of land. They got it today. They managed to buy hotels. They had at one time 3. Gas station, truck stop.
Was this Black Wall Street?
No.
Modern version of it.
No. This brother is alive today. In fact, he just invited me down to a program that will happen next month. Now, they came after them, and when I say they, I'm talking about the system. And they were able to take most of what they had in terms of property. But the land they still have, and they are producing all kinds of products and so forth. Now, what I have done, because I have a very large family, we all come from the plantation, and the land that we sharecrop, most of my family was able to buy that land. So together, my family owned about 1,000 acres of land. Together, 10 acres here, 20 there, 40 and so forth. But most of it is connected. So we have what is called family union. Generally, we have anywhere from 200 to 300 of us come back on that land that we were raised. So I want to model and do some of the things that y'all have done. I looked at 3 areas since this year. They have elected me as the elder to kind of pull family union together. And I look at all the models that are there, and I'm showing lots of tapes because we'll be together for 4 days.
Excellent.
But as I spoke to the rest of the elders, we came up with 4 4 focal points. And a lot of black folks have family reunion, and then you can break this down into your own family. But we looked at first, what are the 4 things we need to look at? First thing we look at is health. There are so many things because the food is chemicalized and etc.
Yeah.
There are ways now that we together, since we have land, can produce food for ourselves, and it be wholesome food. We can raise chickens. We can create an economy within this family to be healthy and at the same time spring out businesses. You got eggs, you got honey, you got herbs that can be grown, all kinds of things that we need to get good food and to be healthy. The second thing we looked at was economy, because health, you can spring an economy out of just supplying your own food, so many things. Then the third thing we looked at was education. And how do we come together to educate from our children, from the youngest of age, because we're going to have to do this ourselves. We can't depend on other people to create jobs for us, to educate our children, to build our economy. This is our responsibility. So, as you have said, Graham and Owen, it starts with your own family. Right. We can't look at other people to do for us what we know they ain't going to do. We have to do that for ourselves. So, I'm just...
tie this into what we just saw Garvey go through.
Well, that's what Garvey was all about. And then it was on an international basis and a connection to Africa. I've been maybe about 25 different countries in Africa. I know there are Africans who are reaching out to African Americans. We hold the key to African liberation. One, we hold the key financially. We spend over $1 trillion plus dollars every year. Africa is begging, needs that investment. There are a lot of brothers and sisters in Africa who are looking to us, who want to work with us, who want to do business with us, who want to create that economy. This government does not want to see that happen.
Now, the reason why I brought all this up, because you were at the same debate that I was at.
Yes.
And we saw at the end of the debate that what was his name? Nchawi said that the problem with us is that we fight amongst each other.
That is true, but that's
natural.
That's my
Every
point.
family that happens.
My point is that Garvey came here with the Pan-Africanism when Booker T had started in 1901. And Garvey came here 15 years later. All right? But his flaw was this problem of, being on his own, not trusting anybody.
Well, it was
and
more than that.
spending money that he wasn't supposed. He was had great ideas, but his flaw lied in spending money he wasn't supposed to be spending.
Well,
that's my
which
point.
biographers you
We
read.
always wind up killing our major intent by being self-indulgent.
We all have flaws, and
my point is that
not to
we fight amongst
capitalize.
each other because we're not able to be close enough to each other, not to be loving enough of each other.
What you're
Great
leaving
ideas,
out-
but we have an individual thing about taking care of.
You're also
Human
leaving
nature.
out the involvement of the FBI, who was working with Marcus Garvey's partner
And it's divide and conquer.
to undermine the Black Star lines and everything that he was doing. And remember, one of the most nefarious individuals that lived in the 20th century was J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, yeah.
And in the same pot, you can put the President of the United States, the former Secretary of State, that Austrian guy. Kissinger, all right, who's responsible for probably killing more people than Hitler. Those two guys, all right? But it was the FBI, and you have to look at their pattern of undermining anything productive.
All I'm saying
Even
is,
the breakfast program for children with the Black Panther Party.
Our biggest problem is we hustle each other.
Well, there
And
is
that's what we gotta put a
there is
stop
more
to.
going on
Do we
than
dare
that.
get past
Of
that?
course it
There's
is.
more going. So
We're
don't
all
focus on
divided
that.
and conquer.
Don't
It's
focus
divide
on
and
that.
conquer. You throw crack into the neighborhood and we kill each other fighting over the money.
Some people do that, but we have 4 brothers right
There's
here
more.
who are
That's
laboring in
not the
4 different
focus point.
vineyards. And this is the point, this is the challenge.
I bring this
Each
to
of
your
us works in
attention
different
because I
vineyards.
discovered it myself through this debate that we were having. And Clemson rode over that and went into a whole different thing because you didn't want to address the Marcus Garvey
There are
point I was
flaws about
bringing up.
Garvey that make headlines.
About our flaws. And when I'm talking about our personal flaws.
Jackson had flaws with the
That's the big one.
SCLC.
Talk about
Jackson had to
Martin
leave the
He was less than
SCLC. Martin
perfect,
Luther
so
King
what?
was involved with a woman in Queens, New York that I knew about
human.
40 years ago.
He's human.
Right?
Do
So
these things stop them
everybody
from
has their
being
flaws.
good leaders?
And that's
Okay.
not the focus. Just like Barack Obama has flaws, and
Yes,
you
he
better
does. He
believe
smokes in
that you
private.
still
You'll
love
never see him with a
Barack
cigarette in
Obama.
public.
All right?
The man
Everybody
smokes.
has their
Smokes a little
flaws.
pipe, that's all right.
Everybody,
He
no,
does
we're not
Hawaiian
talking about that. I'm not
cake.
talking about that. Everybody has their flaws.
Right.
You
So
got to go to Hawaii.
get
You've been
past-
to Hawaii,
Get
man.
past the
You're
flaws.
blessed.
Get past the flaws and focus on the
Well,
positive.
I
because
I
by
speak about the past because
focusing
we
on
got
the
flaws
negative
today.
is
Look at
exactly what they do.
look
That's
how-
what
But
they
we can't
promote.
how
focus
Negative.
on any of our
Look how
flaws.
they
That'll
get on
stop us.
Barack Obama.
Stop
other
focusing
black-
on the negative.
I'm
That's
trying-
what they do.
Well,
Don't do
I
what
bring
they
all
do.
this past
Even-
flaws because I'm following Dr. Jeffries, and he had a lot to say about that. You didn't bring out the point of what he said about the Caribbean differences. About they'll come here and do anything.
But some
they have no
conversations-
problem with white people.
Some conversations
They
go
Is that
are
what he
on.
said?
in a different mind, in a different mindset.
That's
what the
right.
British do with their subjects, the British are
you
great
go.
at mind melting
That's right.
black people.
Dividing
And
and
don't
conquer.
forget, it was a Brit who came here from Barbados to teach these white
Willie
people
Lynch.
the Willie Lynch program. Those are the
Yeah,
British.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's right.
Those are the same people
That's
that
right.
came here
That's right.
and slaughtered millions of people to take the
But why
land.
would you put your kid down into a grave and pull a ladder out and say, yeah, teach him some character?
Why would my mother-in-law's father throw her into the water and tell her swim? Like a
don't
lot
know.
of people have done with their
I
kids, just
don't
throw them in
know.
the water. Don't know. So
A lot
that's
of
not
people
the
come out
focus
with
of life.
complexes.
That's
Our
not the
challenge,
focus of
as we
life.
come towards the
Yeah,
end of
but
this
I'm saying,
program,
that
one
was
of our
his
challenges has to
His
be
downfall was that he spent money that he wasn't supposed to spend.
the man was flawed. Given. Now let's move.
Get
past
off
it.
it.
Let's
Get
move
off
past
it.
it. That should not be the headline of the life of Marcus Garvey. Just as any one of the 4 of us, somebody can take something in our life and make a headline out of it. More importantly
My
for this
point
program
is,
and for us is what we
You
agree
go
on.
to
we
any
move
church
ahead.
and they take 10% off the top.
Who takes 10% off the top?
Well, the administrative.
Maybe the church you go
the
to.
administrative
All right?
costs of
See,
any
that's that
any
Uncle Tom
pastor.
mentality you're talking about.
Any
That's your church,
pastor's
not my
administrative
church.
costs can be called into question. Does he really need to drive a big car as opposed to driving an Audi? You know, we can focus on that minutiae or the more important thing, which is the welfare of our children, which depends upon us recognizing each other's
That's
strengths.
stereotypical
That-
nonsense.
Next
let's
week we'll
focus.
bring up some points of more up to date. Now just going to the past.
As we step into Black
because
History
of
Month, this is
Dr.
what we have to
Jeffries.
do.
Every Sunday we're having a different debate. Next week we're talking about Martin and Malcolm, which are my favorites.
If you're able to get videotape
God
of
and the
that,
devil.
that would help us.
Which and Malcolm's later life, he became you saw the beginning. But again, well, thank you for coming to the Gilchrist Experience. It's been exciting, and the God in me loves the God in you. All right, stay powerful and black power.
Amen. Ashe, hallelujah.
Black power.
I don't know.
Amen.
What God?
I don't know if I'm seeing that they identified the speakers because I realized part of the program we want to introduce. So I'm hoping that